church benches and into the trenches. Let's make a righteous ruckus.
Hey, welcome back to this episode, or welcome back to the Righteous Ruckus podcast. I am your cordial host, Riley Lowe. And once again, if you're watching, you've caught me. It's kind of been a while since I got caught. I recorded one of these right after mowing the yard, and today happens to be one of those days. So here I am after mowing the yard. So I got my yard mowing clothes on. This is not a high expenditure production, in case anybody was ever wondering. Today I want to get into Noah. All right, the great flood of Noah, Noah's Ark. We were all taught about Noah's Ark. I'm going to tell you about it's in plain sight when you read it, but something I hadn't noticed until it was brought to my attention within the last, actually it's been on my mind the last few weeks, right? It's been close to a month that I've been thinking about this and really wrestling with it. And I think it's a kind of a light bulb moment, kind of when you get into that. And I'm going to kind of tell you how it applies, or what I see potentially applies to a different part of the Bible. All right, namely eschatology. And it's just a really interesting way that this kind of intersects, if you will. And I don't remember who it was, or somebody said, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes. That's kind of the way it is with a lot of things in the Bible, where, there'll be like 40, the number 40 will be used a lot. The number 3, right? The number 7, and just these different events will be, precursors will happen at one point, and then another point, a similar thing will happen where it's not identical, but there's definitely an application and a foreshadowing that goes along there, and it rhymes, if you will. And I want to get into that regarding the flood. And I'm just going to do this. I'm going to basically read Genesis chapter 7 with commentary, right? Most of it. I'll probably get down to, 17 to 19, somewhere in that area. But you'll see this part that jumps out at me that had never jumped out at me before. And it's, like I said, when you read it now, it's like, well, duh. But my whole life, and I think what happens a lot of times is you get these preconceived notions when it comes to, this is a story here, an account. Noah and the ark is an account that you've learned since you were a little baby, right? You get shown these different things, these different cartoons and little books with all this stuff, and it's actually downplayed to a point to where people think that it's only a children's story because it's been downplayed so much, because it's been cleaned up basically to the point where people just think of it as a little children's story. That's why people will paint little Noah's Ark murals in their nurseries, or by the crib to their baby and all that sort of thing, right? But in the reality, it's a blatant and very vivid example of God's judgment on the world, right? Judgment for the sins of those in the world that just turned awful. Kind of like how it will be shortly before the Son of Man, aka Jesus, returns, right? So let's get into it. Genesis chapter 7, the great flood. That's what it is here. The title there. So, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and all your family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. You are to take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, for sacrifices obviously, and maybe to munch on, a male and its mate, a pair of every kind of unclean animal, so 2 of every unclean animal, a male and its mate, male and female, and 7 pairs of every kind of bird of the air, male and female, to preserve their offspring on the face of the earth. For 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. 7 days from when? 7 days from when you take 7 of the clean and 2 of the unclean into the ark. For 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living thing I have made. And chapter 5, or verse 5 here, and Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. He took those animals into the ark. Right? Now Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Remember, they entered the ark with the animals on that one day. The clean and unclean animals, the birds, and everything that crawls along the ground came to Noah to enter the ark, 2 by 2, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days, after what? After 7 days after what? 7 days after Noah and his wife and all the animals came on the ark. They're telling you again. 7 days after that day, the flood waters came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, all the mountains of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were open, and the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. When did the rain start falling? In every movie I think I've ever seen, and every depiction, it's as soon as the doors are shut to the ark, it starts raining. Actually, I remember a cartoon where it starts raining before the doors are shut in. It was a children's show, right? Before I think it had James Earl Jones narrating it, as a matter of fact. The rain starts falling before the doors are even shut. Of course, I think in that cartoon also, Noah was the one that pulled the doors shut, which is wrong, as we'll find out here in just a second. This is verse 13. On that very day, Noah entered the ark. On what day? On that same day that Noah entered the ark, along with his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and his wife, and the 3 wives of his sons, they and every kind of wild animal, livestock, crawling creature, bird, and winged creature, they came to Noah to enter the ark. On that day, they entered the ark. 2 by 2 of every creature with the breath of life, and they entered, the male and female of every living thing, as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord shut him in. On what day? On that day. So see, he keeps saying on that day. He keeps saying 7 days after everybody gets on board, the rain's going to start. 7 days after is when the flood begins. It sure doesn't, when you just read it, it kind of reiterates it, and almost, it's not a linear story. It kind of talks about this and then reiterates a point, and talks about it a little bit more, reiterates another point. You see, so it makes it, as far as our Western thinking, it's a little bit difficult to follow because of that. And so this is what I want you to see. So for 40 days, let's go to verse 17. After the Lord shut him in for 40 days, the flood kept coming on the earth, and the waters rose and lifted the ark high above the earth. So the waters continued to surge and rise greatly on the earth. And the ark floated on the surface of the waters. Finally, the waters completely inundated the earth, so that all the high mountains under the heavens were covered. So here is the key. I've already mentioned it a couple times now. The animals all got on the ark, as well as Noah's family. The Lord shuts the doors. And then 7 days transpire between then and the judgment of the flood. You might be able to see where I'm going with this and what this mirrors or foreshadows or rhymes with, to go back to that example of history rhyming. 7 days transpired there. I've never noticed that before until it was brought to my attention. And you read it and I was like, surely not, because I don't remember reading it that way. But you go back and you read Genesis 7, and the same day, on that very day, Noah entered the ark along with his family and all the creatures. Well, you go back on that very day, and it says right up there in verse 4, for 7 days from now, it's 7 days from when everybody gets on board. For 7 days from now, I will send rain upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights and wipe everything off the face of the earth. You say, well, surely that's not right, is it? Well, yeah, because everybody gets on board. And then verse 10 again, and after 7 days, the flood waters came upon the earth. After 7 days. So Noah, being found righteous, right, as it was to say in verse 1 there, because I have found you righteous in this generation. And he gets tasked with this stuff. And because he was found righteous, him and his family board the ark with all those creatures. The Lord shuts them in before what? Before the judgment comes. I don't know about you guys, but that sure does seem to scream. What do I want to say there? Just scream Daniel 9. The 70th week of Daniel. If you go to read Daniel 9, there's the 70 weeks of Daniel's prophecy there. Everybody, we can talk about, eschatology and disagreements and all millennialism and all those sorts of things, right? Personally, I'm a premillennial dispensationalist. So, but here's what it sure seems like. Let's read Daniel 9. Daniel 9:27. And this is talking about, well, actually, let's go blah, 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 blah. Let's talk about verse 27. Daniel 9, verse 27. Then he shall confirm, who's he? The Antichrist, right? Shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. 1 week, meaning a week of years, right? 7 years. We know this. But in the middle of the week, in other words, 3.5 years, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations, or some people say this is the abomination of desolation, right? Wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation, which is determined, is poured out on the desolate. Of course, then you go into Revelation. You look at the bowls and the trumpets and the vials, those judgments, right, that are coming right there at the end before Jesus sets foot on the Mount of Olives. That's God's judgment. What was the great flood? What was the great flood? Noah's flood. That was God judging the earth, right? It had become so wicked, so vile. God judged the earth with the flood. And then he says, hey, I'm never going to flood the earth again. Well, if you look there, Noah and his family were shut in 7 days, 1 week before the flood started. They were taken out of harm's way 1 week before the flood started. Then you look at Daniel's 70th week, which is yet to begin, right? It's going to begin when the Antichrist, we believe anyway, a lot of people believe this way, when the Antichrist confirms a covenant with Israel, a peace treaty, if you will, for 7 years, right? For 1 week. A week is the week of years. And so I think it's kind of interesting how, if you think about I've heard something like this recently, where you think about like the Olympics, they have an opening ceremony and a closing ceremony. They're different ceremonies and serve different purposes, but they're often similar. There's similar things involved in both. You look at this and you look at Genesis 7, and the believers, the righteous people, are taken out of harm's way and provided shelter from God's wrath 7 days before it starts, before it's poured out. And what happens 7 days or 7 years before Jesus returns? Right before that 7-year span begins, people are taken out, if you believe like I do, in the rapture. And God's righteous, chosen people are the people who believe, put their faith in Jesus Christ, accepted the free gift of salvation, right? Those people are taken away before the 7 years of God's wrath are poured out and the cleansing of Israel, right? So that's just something I thought was really interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, if you've ever even considered something like that. I mean, I'll be the first to admit, I didn't even notice till recently that Noah was sitting around in a boat for 7 days before the first drop of rain even fell. I had no idea. And it just kind of blew my mind. And like I said, when I saw that 7 days, I couldn't help but think that sure does kind of offer a hint of like people being raptured out or taken away or provided shelter during God's pouring out of his wrath in the Great Tribulation. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. It just seems like such a cool thing. I know people have different thoughts on eschatology, different thoughts on the end times, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And man, I just thought it was something cool. Anyway, it's be a good time to get on the ark now before God's wrath gets poured out. For anything, we don't even know if we're going to make it on the ark, right? What I mean by that is before you're taken out, before God's judgment's poured out. There's going to be a lot of us that, we're not guaranteed our next breath. I think James says your life is but a vapor, right? So now is the time. There should be a sense of urgency in your life. You can see the way the world's headed. It's headed downwards. Our moral decline, moral depravity of the world is headed in the wrong direction. And I believe that we're headed to a point where eventually the last person will be saved before the Great Tribulation, before the rapture. And then that kicks in and we'll be in the middle of the God pouring his wrath out. We want to be on the ark so that we're spared from that wrath of God, right? From that judgment. And like I said, you may disagree with this, and that's great if you do. I mean, it's fine if you do. The main thing is that even if you disagree with how I'm suggesting the end times, my eschatological, well, that's easy for me to say, eschatological view, then we can all agree that today is the day to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Today is the day to ensure that you've been sealed, that your eternity has been sealed and you'll spend eternity with God. Today is the day to, if you have not, or if you know somebody that has not, to speak with them, to ensure that they get sealed and that their salvation is guaranteed, that they have a personal relationship with Jesus and they've laid it all down and they've cried out to God and repented of their sins and said, Lord, I believe what you've done. I believe what you've said. I believe what you've accomplished. And I accept this gift of salvation, this gift of everlasting life. I accept it and I look forward to spending eternity with you, Lord. And one by one, we'll get more people on the boat. And, I have a habit of saying, let's make heaven crowded. In this case, let's make the proverbial ark crowded.